I think we're going to see an insane upside price potential for Bitcoin as the United States pursues this policy.
Today I sit down with BitMEX co-founder and crypto billionaire Arthur Hayes as he reveals his 2025 crypto forecast after the election. What's your prediction for Bitcoin after the election? Watch today's whole video as we talk altcoins, Ethereum or Solana in 2025, as well as best crypto trade.
That'd be my top trade for 2025.
Click subscribe to Altcoin Daily for one video per day, keeping you informed about crypto. And let's start. What's your prediction for Bitcoin after the election?
I think that there's going to be a period of indecision, volatility, as we understand the losing side. Are they going to accept the result or not? Is Harris or Trump going to concede on Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, whenever their preliminary results are held? And then even if they concede, will their followers, be peaceful about accepting the result? And I think that's really the question. Whoever wins, it doesn't really matter. Their economic policies are pretty much constrained by the mathematics of the U.S. debt situation and the desire of the elites in America to continue attempting to be a military superpower. So I don't really think they have much choice in what they do. There'll be some different stylistic differences in how they accomplish it or don't, but they're going to pursue the same policies. And so I think it's a bit of irrelevant in terms of, if that's the choice between the two for you as a voter in the United States, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. And trying to trade it is a fool's errand because, as we saw, Bitcoin went to 74,000 or 73,000 last week, and now it's at 66 or 67, whatever it is this morning. And so if you were like, oh yeah, let me pile in on the Trump trade, and then, sentiment changes slightly over the weekend, and now you're already down 5% or whatever it is, right? So it's really hard to trade these sorts of situations where it's essentially a coin toss between the two leading candidates.
If Kamala wins, how do you think Bitcoin will react?
Maybe unchanged to slightly down.
Got you. And are you as a crypto guy, are you pro-Trump, or like you said, do you not think about it that way?
No, I think Trump was in office for 4 years between 2016 to 2020. He did nothing for crypto. Kamala Harris has been in office for the last 4 years. She has done nothing for crypto. The government apparatus, whether the Democrat or Republican at the relevant regulatory agencies, have their own agenda and they're pursuing it. They pursued it under Trump. They pursued it under Harris. Nothing really changed. Maybe the intensity for particular businesses changed in terms of their regulatory scrutiny. But from the overall standpoint of comprehensive crypto-friendly regulation, which is encouraging people to use, self-sovereign money, that's absent in America. It's not surprising to see that. I'm not surprised about that. But anyone who claimed that Trump is pro-Bitcoin has just fallen into sort of listening to the siren song of him saying the right things because he wants your vote and he wants your money.
What's your outlook for Bitcoin in 2025, no matter who wins? Do you believe in the 4-year cycle with this fourth year of the 4-year cycle next year?
I don't have a particular view on how many years in a particular cycle. My view is based on how much money is going to be printed at the end of the day. We know the Bitcoin technology is solid. Of course, there could be something that happens. That's not really the question here. The question is how much money is the United States going to print? How much is China going to print? How much is Japan going to print? How much is the Eurozone going to print? Those 4 economic blocks are the most important. And so if you have a view on that, then that should inform your view about the amount of credit that's available in the system that wants to find a home in a fixed supply asset with infinite duration. And that's Bitcoin.
You are a trader. I follow you on Twitter. You are a trader in this market. Given that I believe it's a stimulus, there's more stimulus into the global economy into next year. What's your Bitcoin outlook? Is it above 100K, or is that chump change at this point?
I mean, I think next year is going to be quite interesting. I would say my price target is between $100,000 to $250,000 for Bitcoin by the end of next year. I still think that we could get to $100,000 in 2025. However, I think the risk to that forecast is essentially, let's assume that Trump wins, and then you have Janet Yellen, who is a Democrat, and her stooge, Jerome Powell. They're not going to provide the type of accommodation necessary to propel Bitcoin higher by year end. On the flip side, if Kamala Harris wins, and then you have an incentive for the Democrats to continue to juice the markets, led by Janet Yellen at the Treasury. And so I think that we could see a bit of a liquidity drain in terms of the U.S. market, because the Fed might be a bit more hawkish and the Treasury might not be playing their games that they're playing in the repo markets and with how they're issuing bills and whatnot, because they're quite openly pro Harris and pro the Democrat Party. And, there's various Fed governors who've gone on record stating that they think a Donald Trump presidency is negative for America, and they're going to do whatever it takes to help make that eventuality not occur. And so if he gets elected, you're going to have the monetary arm of the government essentially going on strike against him for the, 50 or 60 days between election result and January 20th. So that could be a period of intense volatility. You also have a debt ceiling, charade that starts on the 1st of January. Again, the establishment government wants Harris. If Trump is in there, they're not really incentivized to try to grease the wheels. But after Trump replaces everybody in sort of, January, February, March, we're back on track, back on the program. So I'd say that would be the major risk for Bitcoin going into the end of the year.
Arthur, I'm a libertarian. I voted third party in the last 2 elections. So I'm not trying to juice an answer out of you. But it sounds like what you're saying is Kamala is better for Bitcoin because they'll print more money. It'll be easier to print more money.
I was saying in the short term, the things that the Treasury has been doing and the Fed has been doing will continue. And they have a problem in the markets, which requires more liquidity. There's issues with repo. There's issues with overnight reverse repos. There's issues with supply of coupons and bills and lots of technical plumbing of the money markets in America, which is really fixed by ending quantitative tightening, restarting quantitative easing, and changing some banking regulations on how they account for treasuries and different types of debt. What I'm saying is that all these things are going to happen, whether it's Trump or Harris. It's just if Harris is in power, it's a continuation of the last 4 years, and we know what they've done for the last 4 years, and so they're going to continue to print money to help her do the things that she said she was going to do. Now, if Trump gets in, they all hate Trump, and so they'll put a break on it. Trump will put different crop of people in charge, and then they'll pursue the same policies that Harris's people would have pursued, but it'll be his people and not her people. And so it's just a personnel issue. And so I think that we could get sort of a 60-day maybe liquidity strike in the US dollar funding markets if you have sort of an antagonistic Treasury to the incoming Trump presidency.
Arthur, talk to me about the debt ceiling, but more importantly, just the amount of debt that the United States and globally we're all under. How do we get out of that? It seems overwhelming.
So I don't know if getting out of it is sort of the right metric. If you're a government, what do you care about? The ratio that they all care about is the total stock of debt to GDP, gross domestic product. And so I'm actually writing an essay about this right now, so it's top of mind. I was going through their latest Treasury quarterly refunding announcements. And so the Treasury Department prepares a report to the TBAC, which is the Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee, which is made up of a lot of the large too big to fail banks. And so the Treasury, the state of the U.S. economy and spending and their outlook for bills and coupons. So in the latest report, they break out the top 4 spending items of the U.S. government. And so number 1 is health and health services, plus social health care for the poor, the sick, the indigent, the old. And then you have defense spending, Veterans Affairs, which is the U.S. government's military stuff, right? They're going to go bomb everybody around the world. That costs a lot of money. And then you have the Treasury's interest payments on the debt funding, the deficit to pay for those basically 4 line items in the spending bill. And so if you look at in total those 4 things or 5 things, they're all growing faster than nominal GDP. And so the economy is growing slower than the spending of the federal government. And so that's the problem. Now, there's a very easy way to fix this problem. And we saw this between 2020 to 2023, when Trump and Biden each did a stimulus program that was financed by the Fed. So the Fed did QE to pay for the Treasury's borrowing to hand out stimulus checks to everyone. Now, the contrast to what has happened from 2008 until 2020 in the United States, where I call it QE for rich people. The Fed does quantitative easing. Assets end up in rich people's hands, stockholders, there's buybacks. I know they buy expensive real estate, they buy art, whatever, but it doesn't end up in people who are actually going to spend it. And therefore, banks aren't going to lend money to companies to increase production because the majority of the US population is no better off for quantitative easing. And what you see is a money multiplier of 1 and no real economic growth created and a rise in debt to GDP. But Trump and Biden changed that with the stimulus checks, where they handed out money to everyone. And what did people do? They're poor. They spent it all. And then what was the government doing at the same time? They were saying, hey, we want factories. We want green energy. We want it built here in America. We're going to provide tax credits and subsidies to companies who do this. And so what companies did, they put together the program. They applied for the money from the government. They went to a regional bank, a non-too-big-to-fail bank, and they got a corporate loan. And so if you look at the amount of loans issued by small to medium-sized banks in the United States from 2020 to 2022, you see a market increase, even as the Fed is raising rates, because there's real demand that companies need to increase production for because the government's paying for it. And so you saw the debt to GDP ratio actually fall. The US government deleveraged because nominal GDP growth was running so hot. Obviously, inflation ran hot alongside it, but the government is actually deleveraging itself. So we have QE for rich people, 2008 to 2020, QE for poor people, 2020 to 2022, and then the bondholders revolted, and so they went back to QE for rich people, 2022 until the present. Now, the problems with the U.S. government are pretty intractable, right? They outsource the entire manufacturing base to China, and now the United States plus NATO, who have a combined GDP of 22 times that of Russia, cannot beat them in Ukraine. And so that means that the United States needs to reindustrialize so that they can produce more weapons to go and fuck more people up, right? That's what America does. And that means that every single supply chain thing that comes from China needs to go back to America or Western Europe. And that's extremely expensive because if you look, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but when you think about the trillions of US dollars of bank credit that China provided to real industry to build the things that are necessary to make the products that make them the workshop of the world, that's in the single digit to tens of trillions of US dollars of bank credit. The United States needs to do the same thing, and they need to do it faster because they have wars to win. And so that's why I think that QE for poor people, which means industrial policy, bank credit for favorite industries, semiconductors, manufacturing firms, weapons dealers, those type of folks, and Treasury handouts so that people can afford their healthcare. That's what's coming, and it's going to be massive. So that's why I think that in the medium term, Trump or Harris has to do these things. They're not saying, hey, I'm going to stop doing wars. They're not saying, hey, old people, you're not getting any more healthcare. And so this is the only way to pay for it. And the only way to pay for it where the economy is actually growing and the government is deleveraging itself is to do QE for rich people. And if you looked at the amount of dollars that were emitted between 2020 to 2022 in the stimulus programs, 40% of all dollars that were ever created were created in those 2 years. And so QE for poor people is massively inflationary. And we all know what happened in Bitcoin. What was it, 3,000 to 69,000 at the top of that bull market. So I think we're going to see an insane upside price potential for Bitcoin as the United States pursues this policy. And obviously this isn't done in a vacuum. Western Europe needs to do the same thing to beef up their security. China and Russia aren't going to sit around and not do it as well. And so everyone's doing the same thing. No one's really saying I'm going to do austerity, balance the budget. No one's trying to be like Argentina. If you look at Argentina, yeah, they balanced the budget, but industrial production was down 20% recently. So that's a revolution right there if you have that in any sort of fractional banking society like the US or China.
You said Bitcoin to 100, maybe 250K this cycle. Longer term, given that QE and money printing is inevitable, is Bitcoin to $1 million inevitable?
I don't know, I'm going to say it's inevitable. I think it's a very high probabilistic situation if the amount of credit that has to be emitted to solve these problems happens. Of course, there's a risk that the population says, I don't want that. We want austerity. We want to tighten our belts. We want to live within our means, and we want to destroy a lot of businesses because that demand is fake. It was paid for by printed money, and so we have to extinguish that credit and go back to a more sustainable economy. That is a risk, a very big tail risk. I don't think it's going to happen, but that could happen.
Arthur, Ethereum or Solana in 2025?
I'm going to go with Ethereum. And the reason is, again, I'm still running the numbers here. Solana is done because revenue on the chain has gone up massively as transaction volumes have increased. And, on a net issuance basis, they've sort of overcome the persistent unlocks that are happening. But the larger you get, the harder it is to go faster, right? The law of large numbers. And so I think Ethereum really has the potential here, as the transaction fees and L2s continues to decline, to really gin up transaction volumes. And on a relative basis, from where Solana has come from to today, it's going to be harder to repeat that feat. And so the marginal sort of utility or diminishing returns of what's going to happen for a Solana holder is going to set in at these levels. And so I think that Ethereum could be a better bet over sort of the next 12 to 18 months.
Ethereum is, I forget, maybe like 2,500 today. Is a 10K Ethereum reasonable for this cycle?
I don't know if reasonable is the right question. Could it go up 4x?
What do you think?
I don't have a price target on Ethereum in mind. I'm sort of more focused on sort of like creating numbers for Bitcoin. Ethereum it'll do what it does. I do think it'll perform better than Solana. They're both will do well because there will be more liquidity sloshing around the system. It's sort of just like the relative play in that perspective.
Arthur, you are a Bitcoiner first and foremost. You believe in decentralization. Having said that, I follow you on Twitter, and you're tweeting about Pendle and Goat and Doge and Aether. What are your top 5 altcoin trades for 2025 that you own?
That I own. Obviously, Athena. So I think that obviously the price has gotten beaten down a lot. It went up to what, $1.50? Now it's about 35, 40 cents, whatever that is. Again, if we're going into this situation where the rate of interest given to savers has to be repressed to fund the massive amount of credit issued to right size the relevant economic blocks, then you're not going to earn the real rate of return of all the industrial production that's being built. It's going to be like China from the 90s until today, right? They've been 10 to 20% of industrial value add, whereas the rate on deposits was like 3 to 5%. So that's going to come to the United States and Western Europe as well. And so you're going to see the situation where if crypto's ripping and people want to speculate, get long, they're going to pay for that leverage, and they're going to pump up the basis. The difference between the futures, the perp swaps and cash, that feeds into Athena. Right now it yields, 13% APY versus 5% for Fed funds. And I guess it could go to 4.5 by the end of this week, depending on what happens at the Fed meeting on the 7th of November. And so as rates go down, as rates get more deeply negative versus the growth in the global economy on a fiat basis, Athena is going to look a lot better. And so I think there's going to be more inflows in TVL and circulation, which will pump up the price. I also think that the team at Athena is doing an excellent job of getting USDE used as primary source of collateral and a lot of centralized and decentralized exchanges. I think that they're going to be announcing some extremely amazing partnerships with some of the leading exchanges over the next 6 to 12 months, which is really going to propel Athena into the leagues of USDC and Tether. And that's really going to juice sort of the value of the ENA token. So I would say that'd be my top trade for 2025.
I love it. And Goat's not the trade. I saw you recently tweeting about it.
It's a trade. It's fun. I around with these meme coins. So if the liquidity situation is good, if Bitcoin's pumping, if Sol's pumping, if ETH's pumping, people are going to want to spend their money. They're going to spend it on meme coins. Hopefully they're going to spend it on ordinals. Obviously, Maelstrom and Oil Wallet, we're doing a collab on Airheads, a generative collection on the ordinals sort of framework. And so these are all sort of symptoms of the same thing. As we get richer in Bitcoin, ETH, and Solana terms, we spend our money on cultural artifacts and funny jokes. And so if you can predict which one of those slaps, then you're going to do well. And so I'll try my hand at it. It's fun. I make a little bit of money here, lose a bit of money there. It keeps you engaged. I think it's very fun. I'm not sort of a hardcore, meme coin day trader. That's extremely difficult. And if you look at the statistics, I think not 1% of people actually really succeed in that sort of trading environment.
Arthur, final question. Any hot takes for the Fed meeting on the 7th? Are we just in a cutting year for the next 12 months?
Again, I think it really depends on who wins the election or who's thought to. If Harris is the one, I think that the Fed might communicate an end to quantitative tightening and lay the path for how quantitative easing is going to come back into the markets. And then maybe they'll cut 50 basis points as well to really help her out. If Trump is put in, I think the Fed holds, and then we're sort of left guessing as to what's going to happen post end of January.
Arthur Hayes, thank you so much.